Hey, hey. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I really appreciate you being with us. Hope everything's going really well for you here at the early part of the week. My week has started out absolutely fantastically. I won't go into any details on that, but I had a fantastic weekend also. I got to go to what they call a racers auction, and racers, dirt track, drag strip. Sometimes guys they sell off their surplus parts, and I try to buy them and resell them because they're just selling them for pennies on the dollar. And I sometimes do very well, not always, but sometimes I do very well on that. And it's kind of a catharsis for me to get away, just step away from my everyday pressure, everyday activities, and it's just a ball. I have several friends that go, and it's like I said, it's just a lot of fun. I don't have a lot of money to spend. I have to be extremely careful on what I buy, but like I said, it's just a hobby, and it's a very enjoyable hobby to me. So anyway, had a great weekend. Had a fantastic beginning to my week with ministry and corresponding with people and what have you. Okay, so once again, thanks for joining me. Okay, so yesterday we began a little bit deeper dive into Daniel chapter 12 and the Great Tribulation. Why? Well, because the Great Tribulation is posited at the end of the age, and the harvest, Succot, is at the end of the age. And in Matthew chapter 13, verse 43, Jesus quotes from Daniel chapter 12. Do you see the connection? I'm just trying to connect the dots that are in Scripture between the subjects of the Great Tribulation, the end of the age, and the fulfillment of Succot, which is the harvest. So I don't have to tell you, I'm sure, that in the eschatological world, there's a tremendous amount of discussion about the Great Tribulation. Our dispensational friends put the Great Tribulation off in our future. Now, I'm pretty sure you're aware of the fact that every time something happens in the Middle East, when October the 7th happened and that horrible tragedy of so many people dying in that terrorist attack, YouTube lit up. Is this the beginning of the Great Tribulation? I created a video over that. But every time something significant, something bad happens in the Middle East, that kind of video begins to be produced. Because it's based upon the idea that the end of the age and the Great Tribulation are, in fact, interrelated. Now, I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that is absolutely correct. By the way, in the end time narrative, the timeline in traditional Judaism, you had the appearance of Elijah, you had the Great Tribulation, then you had the judgment at the coming of the Lord, and the resurrection to usher in the new creation. That's the Jewish timeline. So in the timeline of Israel, they linked the Great Tribulation, the judgment, the resurrection, the coming of the Lord. They did not see any great temporal disparity or separation. And yet, strangely enough, in the all-millennial world, for instance, in the post-millennial world, Kenneth Gentry, Keith Matheson, in the all-millennial world, Jim Jordan, and other great men, post-millennialists, all-millennialists, guess what they always say? Oh, yeah, Great Tribulation happened in the first century. They fail to see the connection between the Great Tribulation and resurrection. Listen, folks, I recently wrote a book entitled These Are the Days When All Things Must Be Fulfilled. In that book, I adduce many passages from the Old Testament These are Old Testament prophecies of the end times. And these are Old Testament prophecies of the resurrection that are quoted by the New Testament writers. But in these Old Testament prophecies, like Isaiah 25, quoted by Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, the time of the judgment of Jerusalem, the time of the Great Tribulation, is linked to that time. Isaiah 26, same identical situation. Isaiah 27, identical situation. Daniel chapter 12, which is our focus. My point being is that when people try to create a dichotomy, a temporal dichotomy, between Great Tribulation and the time of the end, that is simply wrong. Okay, I promised you yesterday that I would focus in on this concept of Great Tribulation and how not only Jesus, but how Josephus kind of settles for us, at least in regard to what the Jews believed. Okay? When Josephus talks about the war, he begins to talk about the fate of Jerusalem. And he says, now this is a paraphrase, and if anyone wants the exact quote, no, I don't have it laying here anymore. Anyway, well, it might be under one of those piles or one of those piles or one of those piles. So anyway, if anyone wants the exact quote and the exact source from Josephus, just contact me. I'll be happy to provide it. So Josephus, in talking about the history of Jerusalem in times of warfare, said Jerusalem had been conquered 5 times. Okay? Catch the power of this now. Jerusalem had been conquered 5 times, but had only been desolated twice. Once in 586 BC, and again in 70 AD. Now, he mentions that Jerusalem was conquered in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Nobody denies that. But he says that Jerusalem was only devastated and destroyed twice, BC 586, AD 70. So what does that mean? That means that when commentators, for instance, I mentioned just recently, Sam Frost, former preterist, who has abandoned that truth, Sam Frost says that Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, the prediction of the Great Tribulation, such as has never been since there was a nation, nor shall ever be to that time. Oh, that's talking about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, as I pointed out to you yesterday, Daniel chapter 9, verse 12 says that BC 586 was a tribulation that was worse than anything that had ever been. I suggest to you that Daniel, through inspiration, was looking beyond the point of time in which he was living, BC 586. Actually, he's living later than that, but he's referring to 586 BC. He's looking beyond that in Daniel chapter 12, and he is looking beyond the time of Antiochus Epiphanes in Daniel chapter 12. And why is that? Well, remember what Josephus said. Conquered 5 times, Jerusalem. Devastated twice, BC 586, AD 70. He glosses right over the time of Antiochus Epiphanes as the time of the Great Tribulation. It wasn't it. Now, does Josephus talk about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes being a horrific time? Certainly does. But guess what? When he's talking about Daniel chapter 9 and the abomination of desolation, he applied that to AD 70. Okay? But here's the real point. The events, let me go back to Matthew chapter 24, in which Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the one who reads understand. And once again, we're told, well, Jesus wasn't saying that Daniel foretold the tribulation that's coming. Daniel was talking about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, which must mean that Daniel was actually describing the time of Antiochus Epiphanes as tribulation such as has never been nor ever yet shall be. But was that the time of Antiochus Epiphanes after all? Brent Petrie makes a great point in his book, Jesus, Tribulation, and the End of the Exile. And in that book, in a footnote, by the way, if you get a chance to buy that book, do it. It's out of print. Some people have contacted me when I've mentioned it before, and they said they found a copy of it on eBay for $150. I didn't pay that much, but I paid $100. Yeah. But I want to tell you, absolutely incredible book. But anyway, Brent Petrie says, commenting on Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy, the city and the sanctuary. And Brent Petrie says, this verse is the Achilles heel of the Antiochon view because Antiochus Epiphanes, never destroyed the city and the sanctuary. Now, if you're going to say that Antiochus Epiphanes is the subject of Daniel 9, 26 and 27, if you're going to say that the Antiochian period is the time of Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, then don't you think that the period of Antiochus Epiphanes ought to fit the description? And yet, once again, Petrie points out, Antiochus never destroyed the city and the sanctuary. Josephus says, it emphasizes, you might even say, that Antiochus did not destroy the city and the sanctuary. So how are you going to say Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled Daniel 9 and Daniel chapter 12? Because he didn't. Listen, folks, I am not disparaging, I'm not discounting how awful the time of Antiochus Epiphanes was. It was without any doubt whatsoever a terrible, terrible time in the history of Israel. I would also point out that it was a time of a renewal of dedication to covenant because of the Maccabees. Now, they were not godly men. Their dad was. But they themselves, while they espoused loyalty to Torah, they were treacherous, murderous men. They were men of blood. Okay, all that aside, here's the bottom line. Once again, let me reiterate, I am not disparaging the horrific nature of the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. But when you lay the time, the events, and the description of the time of Antiochus Epiphanes up against the description of the war of 66 to 70, the time of Antiochus Epiphanes completely disappears off of the map. There is no comparison whatsoever in the scope, in the extent, in the horrific nature of Antiochus Epiphanes versus AD 70. And thus, I suggest to you, once again, that Daniel, when he was being told of about the coming Great Tribulation, he was glossing right over what was going to happen in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was truly looking to the end time. He was truly looking to the time of the end and the greatest tribulation that would ever take place for certain on the nation of Israel. No, the Holocaust was not worse, numerically perhaps, but it was not worse because AD 70 was the end of the theocratic, relational nation of Israel. Period. Nothing like that had ever happened before. It was the greatest tragedy in the history of Israel. Okay, we've got more on the Great Tribulation and the time of the end on the flip side. See you there.